I always was under the impression that sugar was the cause of things like obesity, chronic disease, or diabetes. According to you, you're saying it's not sugar that's causing all of these issues. It's something else.
The data that convinced me that sugar is not the driver. And the reason that I can say that is because don't see correlational evidence between obesity or any of these chronic diseases and sugar consumption.
By the sounds of what you're saying, it's like we're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's like we're literally eating cancer if we don't do this. We're
Yes.
literally eating diabetes if we don't do this. We're literally eating obesity or weight issues if we don't do this. So it's that. I think this is eye-opening. And the simple, very, very simple solution is, what's up, you guys? Today's conversation, honestly, might be one of the most important conversations I think I've ever had on this channel. And that is because I'm always trying to identify the simple solution. There's so much noise, there's so much complexity, and there's so many people saying that all these various things are going to kill you. And at the end of the day, we're going to die one way or the other. What I'm concerned with is I don't want to struggle with weight loss. I don't want to struggle with anxiety or depression. I don't want to have diabetes. I don't want to have Alzheimer's, and I don't want my family or my friends to have that either. It's also expensive. So at the end of the day, this is here to solve real life problems and not be a hypochondriac. And I have to tell you that I do think this conversation will give you the tools to understand why carnivore is so successful for so many and why this is something that, you know, if we add this extra little piece to doing carnivore or meat-based or whatever it is that we do, our lives are going to completely unfold in the most amazing way possible. And it could completely change everything that we know about our healthcare system. So like if you like it, share if you think it should be shared, and go ahead and subscribe if you're into this kind of stuff. Let's get into it. All right, Chris. So really excited to talk with you because you're kind of like the godfather of knowing things about seed oils. And what's really interesting about your work is that until I discovered your work, I always was under the impression that sugar was the cause of things like obesity or diabetes, chronic disease. I've actually been convinced that it's been sugar, but according to you, you're saying, in fact, it's not sugar that's causing all of these issues. It's something else. So I'd love to talk to you about what that other thing is, and then help me understand the very, very simple problem and then the very, very simple solution too. So let's start there. What is the problem if it's not sugar?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on, Lauren. It's really an honor and pleasure to be on your show. And so to get right to the answer is no, I don't think sugar is the driver of really overweight, obesity, or any chronic disease. Coronary heart disease, stroke, cancers, diabetes, metabolic disease, Alzheimer's, macular degeneration, you name it. I don't believe the evidence does not suggest that sugar is the problem. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that I've never advised that people consume lots of sugar. I've been on the, kind of speaking trail since 2016. I started doing this research back about 2013. And it was really the data. I'm really a data junkie, and it's the data that convinced me and convinces me over and over. And we'll go through some of that today, that sugar is not the driver. And the reason that I can say that is because over and over again, we don't see correlational evidence with strong correlations between obesity or any of these chronic diseases and sugar consumption, really. Or the data sort of falls apart when you fully take into account seed oils. So seed oil consumption is the major driver, and there's many reasons for this. Seed oils are toxic. They're dangerous, and we can get into exactly what they do. But the evidence at the population level over and over and over again shows us that it is seed oils that are correlated to obesity and all this chronic disease, not sugar.
Okay. because that's like mind blowing, honestly, if you really take a step back from that, because like it's kind of obvious that sugar in excess isn't good for somebody. And I think there's a lot of arguments about, particularly in people who are trying to figure out carnivore versus animal based, vegan, vegetarian. There's all these silly names out there for diets, but there a lot of them are arguing against how much sugar one should have in their diet for optimal health. But it kind of sounds that like, by the sounds of what you're saying, it's like you're really saying we're focusing on the wrong thing. In fact, yes, maybe control sugar, sure, but more so pay attention to your seed oil intake. And that is the defining factor for what one will have to deal with mental health wise, physical health wise, and so on and so forth. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
That's wild.
Refined and added sugars, to me, the evidence strongly suggests that there's really only one problem with sugar, and it's the same as refined flours. They're nutrient deficient. So if 21% of your diet is sugar, like the typical American adult, then a fifth of your diet is nutrient deficient, right? If you replace that 21% with things that were nutrient replete, if you replace it with fruits or vegetables or meat or whatever, that's something that's nutritious, then you're a step ahead, right? And Weston A. Price's research way back in the 1930s convinced most all of us beyond the shadow of a doubt that refined flours, refined added sugars, and essentially processed foods, they're dangerous, they're problematic. And I've always maintained that people should cut out, reduce, or even, eliminate sugars and refined flours because they're nutrient deficient foods, but they're not pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient like seed oils. And that's why seed oils are so dangerous. But we can go, we can look at some of this data, and you can start, you and your audience can start seeing that when you look at the population level, that there isn't evidence in the United States or many other countries for that matter, to suggest that sugar is the primary driver. It's just not there. And the United States has good evidence of this, and we can look at it if you want to.
Yeah, I want to look at a couple. I know you have a couple of those slides, and I want to share those. I really quick too, though. I think it's important to like call out how ridiculous this sounds, because it does sound ridiculous, honestly. Like you've spent 12 years, though, I think, right, researching this. Like this has become your career. Is a deep dive into figuring out what's going on with the health of people. I think that's going into obesity, right? Also anxiety disorders, depression, anything that's like you'd have to go to the doctor for, basically, is tied back to this problem. Is that right?
Yes.
So like everybody can relate to this exact solution then right now of like,
I believe so. All of us. Wow. So, you might call it the omega-6 theory, because the vegetable oils are very high in omega-6 fat. That's not the only problem with them. But if you look at ancestrally living populations that don't have any obesity, don't have diabetes, metabolic disease, coronary heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and so on, they all share basically three things in common. They don't have refined seed oils, they don't have sugar, and they don't have refined flours, right? But if you dig deeper and you really start looking at the omega-6 consumption, this is what I started doing back in 2019, is I started looking at these various ancestrally living populations that don't have any of these diseases, like the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania. And
I met the Maasai, actually.
Did you?
Just like 3 months ago, in Africa.
Yeah, and the Hadza and Papua New Guineans, the Tokalowans. There's so many of these ancestrally living populations. And I looked at their diet, and the bulk of them have an omega-6 consumption of less than 2% of their calories. So actually the highest one was the Maasai at about 1.7%. But
Well, and
Americans, because we were consuming vegetable oils, we were already at 9.1% omega-6. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not quite right. I don't remember that exact number. I think it was 7.2% by about 1960. And we're at 11.8% by 2008. 11.8% of our diet is omega-6 linoleic acid alone, which again, linoleic acid is the primary 18 carbon omega-6 fat of any natural fat. So
well,
it
and
accounts for about 90% of the omega-6.
and not to, I don't want to interrupt, but I think it's important because of what you're saying is like what we need to understand with the linoleic acid. I think that a lot of people who don't have time to do research don't necessarily understand like omega-6 fatty acids carry a high like proportional rate of linoleic acid basically. And the problem with the reason why so many people are so upset about seed oils is that the information that like people like you are finding is that high concentration of linoleic acid in somebody's diet can cause a lot of issues, but inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction, which then leads to chronic disease and everything else that's ever happened. That's kind of the new science that's going on. So like the reason why the Maasai not having very high linoleic acid compared to other, sub communities or whatever is important because they have great health, even though they're eating, it sounds like very high, high fat, high protein diets because they just basically eat carnivore. But that's kind of the why behind all of this, like why linoleic acid and omega-6s and all those fancy words, why those matter, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. Okay. I just want to make sure that's understood because I think there's a lot of, it's complicated. It's very complicated, all of this stuff.
Yeah. Do you want to look at some of this data?
Yeah. Which slide should I go to that would represent?
Well, I would go to, for the first one, go to, what number is this?
We could do US, slide 13, if you think that makes sense.
Can we do 9 first, just real quick? And
Sure.
because I think people will really be interested to know that they need to see this history of vegetable oils real quick. And I'll do this in 1 minute.
No, this is good.
So, yeah. So this is our published data. We published back in 2017. Of course, it wouldn't have all these pop-ups on there, which is, I put on there to give live presentations, but the curve there, this is vegetable oil consumption in the United States. And you can see over in the far left lower corner that in 1865, our vegetable oil consumption in the United States was 0. Like it was for almost the entire world. It was absolutely 0. The only thing we had was just a trivial amount of olive oil consumption, but we had no seed oil consumption at all. Now, this is all vegetable oils. Okay, so then you can see that by 1909, where the line is still flat, we were at about 1908, we were about 2 grams a day. And then it jumped up in 1909 to 9 grams a day. And if you go to 1960, which is, people can kind of see there's where the curve really starts to inflect.
I see. I had this wrong.
Higher.
Okay. It was here before and then 1906 and then it was 1960. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah, so
this whole part.
1960, I'm just going to give some numbers here. We were consuming 19 grams of seed oils a day. And then in the far right, upper right, we're that's 2008 and we're at 80 grams per person per day. 80 grams, folks, is 720 calories. That's 32% of U.S. caloric intake. So between 1865 and 2008, almost a third of our diet became vegetable oils, which didn't exist before. And if you want to look at this another way, so 1900, 99% of our added fats came from animal fat. And back then, obesity was 1.2% in the United States, and there had never been a documented heart attack. Cancer was very unusual, about 5.6% of deaths or 5.8%. Diabetes was extremely rare. I could go on and on. Macular degeneration rare. Alzheimer's had, there was one case in 1908. And so on and on. But I just want people to see that perspective. So if you
Yeah,
want to jump
and when did all of those diseases and all that typically from your research begin? Like what you just said, not a lot of dates there, but is it starting around like 1906 time or like 1960 time, kind of within that range? You said of like
well,
Alzheimer's, all that.
yeah, so they all really, in general, all of those diseases were once either unknown or complete or very, very rare. So in the 19th century, most all of them were extraordinarily rare.
Okay.
Right. So without, and, I don't think we have time to go through each one, but I could if you want me to.
Well, I think what we ought to do is
But we could
let's
go
look
on to
for.
the data on sugar. We could dig into that a little bit further if you want to go to the
That's
very
what I
next
was
slide.
thinking. I want to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah.
Is this? So I think this is the proper, like
Yeah.
if we're comparing obesity and sugar consumption. So again, like the assumption I think that's common is that um, you sort of just touched on this a second ago is like we had more calories that came from these seed oils. I think the assumption has been like more calories from sugar. It kind of sounds like what you're saying is actually more calories from seed oils, but that it's also not necessarily just the calories that is the problem because of the
Exactly.
linoleic acid in the seed oils. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk
So
about this because this is interesting.
yeah, this is a graph showing sugar versus obesity, and you can see in 1890 when obesity was 1.2%. In the United States, sugar consumption was already 211 calories per day that year, 1890. That's 10.8% of calories. So you already see a disconnect between sugar consumption and obesity. So 1930, obesity was, or sorry, 1930, yeah, 1930, obesity was around 4%. That's an interpolated data, so we don't know exactly, Lauren, because there's no data between 1900 and 1960. So it's an estimate, right? But anyway, sugar consumption that year was already 499 calories a day, 25% of our caloric consumption. So if you just compare 1930 and then jump to the far upper right there of the graph, you can see that sugar consumption in 2016, 526 calories per person per day. It's literally 27 calories higher than it was in 1930. This is what people don't understand is that, yeah, sugar's gone way up, but most all of the increase happened before 1922. And I'll show you that on the next graph. So why then, with sugar really just slightly changing between 1930s and 2016, why did obesity climb from about maybe 3 or 4% in 1930 to 42.5% by 2018, right?
Wait,
It's
so
there's a
you're
complete
saying
disconnect.
here, so you're saying here with this sugar right there,
Mhm. Yeah,
that's the part where, because it's pretty increased heavily before that, between 1822 and then
right.
1930, it's gone up a lot, but we don't have very many diseases up until this point right here or so, right?
It,
Is what you're,
in general, I mean, we'd have to get into the specifics, but in general, most of the diseases, except for coronary heart disease, was up a lot. It become the leading cause of death in the 1930s. But
and obesity was minimal.
obesity was still really minimal, and everybody knows that who's looked at the history at all.
Yeah. And then
Yeah,
here, as it continues to slowly it goes there, kind of drops, and then it kind of keeps going up until 1960s, 70s. And then it's 80s, it's really going 90s, it's going early 2000s. It's really going with sugar, and then it drops off with the
yeah.
sugar. But
So you can see, yeah,
simultaneously, obesity keeps going up.
yeah. So after 1999 or 2004, right in there, sugar starts to decline while obesity goes up even faster. And we could look at that specifically. But can you go? And by the way, for everybody watching, when I'm saying sugar here, that's all forms of added sugar. So that's FAO data or USDA data. They parallel one another. But this is all forms of added sugar. It's not fruit sugar, but it's here's their definition: added sugars include sugars added during the processing of foods such as sucrose and dextrose, foods packaged as sweeteners such as table sugar, sugars from syrups and honey, and sugars from concentrated fruit or vegetable juices. So every form of added sugar there is in this data. All right. So I'm not just saying table sugar or something like that. It's all forms of added sugar, including high fructose corn syrup, maple syrup, you name it, it's in there. So can you go down to two slides down to number 12? Yeah. So here, this is even far more compelling because you can see on the far left side there in the green graph that the green line, sugar consumption in 1922 was 473 calories. Again, like I said, almost all the increase in sugar had already occurred by 1920s. All right, so we're at 473 calories and it's virtually flat. Look at the sugar consumption, flat all the way to 1987. So I picked a period here of 65 years. And you can see the increase in sugar from 1922 to 1987 is 24 calories, or the difference. But you see the line is virtually flat, right?
Yeah. And then you look at the vegetable oil line and it's slowly ticking up, especially once you get around 1960 is when it really shoots up there.
Yeah. And plus the vegetable oil consumption, weird. 78 calories per person per day in 1922, 550 calories in 1987. But what happened to the obesity? So while the sugar is flat, obesity rises from 2.95% in 1922 to 18.6% in 1987.
That's a huge leap.
Oh, huge. It's up 6.3 fold. You can see, so you see during this period, sugar increased 5%. That's basically nothing. Vegetable oils increased 605%. That means they're up sevenfold. Obesity increased 532%. That's up 6.3 fold. So people who want to argue that sugar is driving obesity, well, what are they going to say about this data? Why did obesity go up 6.3 fold, more than sixfold, when sugar didn't change, right?
Yeah. And so I think what's good to dig up from this data is, what we know linoleic acid does to the body, and why that matters as far as we've kind of demonized sugar. I've definitely demonized sugar for sure. But I think it's we're going to have sugar in almost every diet. I eat carnivore and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on carnivore actually. But there's a lot of people who eat meat-based and they argue that one should have sugar. We evolved to eat food seasonally. Sugar is seasonally, and plants that we had to scavenge for food sometimes, various things like that. And there's this huge, should we have sugar? Should we not? But it seems like the consistent thing between the two, meat-based or carnivore, is removing omega-6 fatty acids, aka linoleic acid, aka seed oils. And that's because people find health through all of these different diets. But the one thing they're doing, if they're doing it, is removing that processed food, right?
Well, yeah, this is what happens when people go, and I've been talking about this since 2019. So for almost 6 years now, I've been talking about the fact that, and this is well documented, the NIH of our own government has documented that of the top 15 sources of omega-6 linoleic acid, 10 of them are high carbohydrate foods. And so what I'm saying is, Lauren, is that people unknowingly and unwittingly, when they reduce their carbohydrate consumption, they're reducing seed oils almost without question, because seed oils, when you in processed foods, in restaurant foods, fast foods, ready-made foods, the rice dishes, potato dishes, pasta dishes, all those things, those are where the seed oils run with them, right? That's where they are, and they're hidden in there. And nobody thinks about seed oils, but they're almost a third of the American diet, right? They don't think about this. So they think, okay, I got rid of the rice, I got rid of the potatoes. They don't think about the fact that when they did that, they're getting rid of vegetable oils. I think this is the major reason that that low carbohydrate diets work. So I'll address real quickly, because I know we have limited time here, but vegan diets, you already know this, that they're nutrient deficient, right? That this is what makes them dangerous. They're deficient in fat soluble vitamins, for example, A, D, and K2. If you don't consume any animal products at all. At the other end of the scale, you've got carnivore, and carnivore. It the reason that people do so well and very quickly often is because first of all, they get rid of refined flour, refined sugar, and vegetable oils. The three, food components that make up processed food. They get rid of that. Um, the But the problem, and I could go into detail, but the problem with carnivore long term is that it's very, very difficult. I think it's almost impossible for most people to get enough calcium, magnesium, potassium, and potassium. I'll just say that calcium, magnesium, and potassium on a carnivore diet. And
Even if
this
they're
is where,
eating,
so
even if they're
go
eating
ahead.
organs. Sorry.
If you eat organs, you're still not going to get calcium. You're not going to get significant calcium, magnesium, or potassium, even eating the organs. You'll get your copper. That's the fourth thing. So carnivore diet, if you just go muscle meat, you're going to be very low eventually. It may take 5 years. It's just like vegan. If you go vegan and all of a sudden, if I go vegan today, maybe in 3 or 5 years, the fact that I haven't had any, fat soluble vitamins, A, D, and K2 all that time, well, my liver's storing them. And eventually I'm going to run out and I'm going to start getting into trouble. I'm going to start having problems, right? And it's the same thing with carnivore for most people. I don't think most people can do carnivore long term, but short term, I think it's a great diet, a great elimination diet. I've used carnivore for very short periods of time. But I think long term, it can be just as problematic. I have a number of friends who've gotten into trouble with carnivore, and they had to get off of it because they started developing all sorts of problems.
Now, I
So,
wonder if they were to, so if that's the case, would you recommend, given like what you've been seeing? Let me think about this. If somebody were to just add fruit, and be meat based, have organ meats, what do you think about that for getting the rest of those
yeah, it
nutrients?
might work. This is the thing that I've slowly began to understand, and I really only rather came to this conclusion maybe just 2 or 3 years ago. It's taken me a long time to understand what is the value of fruits and vegetables. And the value really is mostly minerals. It's calcium, magnesium, potassium, and copper is the main things that you cannot get out of a pure meat or just a pure carnivore diet. You're going to eventually. This is why people start getting sooner or later, they often start getting muscle spasms, heart palpitations, the hair starts falling out, they get low T3, so they have low thyroid, right? That's just, that's almost, that's so common to have all these things, and people start getting sick. There's many, I won't give names, but there's people even in the podcasting world that have talked about this and their own experience. And I've had friends that went through the same thing. I just literally, I've tried carnivore up to 20 days and I just am starving to death. It doesn't matter if I eat 2.5 pounds of
Really?
meat a day. I'm just starving to death. And you can't get enough, of those minerals, or at least
I
I
have,
couldn't.
it's weird. I have the opposite experience. I think, I don't experience any of that with the people that I know a lot of people, but that they try different things. But I think there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this and they're going to just like, oh my God, carnivore is the best thing ever, and defend it. I encourage open-mindedness because I think what you're saying has merit. From my experience, I actually have only had bacon and eggs today, and I went to the gym and I ran, I weightlifted, I did a bunch of hard stuff, and I'm going to have a steak tonight and I'm just like not hungry at all,
Yeah.
So it's this opposite thing, but I'm not saying that what you're saying, obviously it happens. It just depends. I think this goes back to people having their own, what they need to do for themselves is what they need to do for themselves. And also being aware, like you're saying, with like there's like these fad things that come around too, like carnivore. And then there's like keto and all these like fad diets. I think at the end of the day, it does make sense that people had some fruits and maybe some vegetables here and there, as long as they're fully cooked, depending on where you live. But, the central point with all, and I've talked to vegan experts. I've had debates with Sean Baker and Ken Berry and Dr. Chafee with all these different approaches. And the one thing that everybody does say to do, regardless of what you think for carnivore or whatever, is to remove ultra processed foods. Because that is the only thing that they keep seeing come up all the time. And with ultra processed foods, would you say that nearly every ultra processed food that we have has linoleic acid in it, in a pretty high, like vegetable oils and those kinds of things, seed oils, mostly all of them,
Yes.
kind of like how they all have corn or whatever it is?
Yes. So that's the thing is if you go through the grocery store or if you look at any kind of fast food or restaurant food, almost all of them are made with vegetable oils, right? You'll almost never find beef tallow, butter, or lard in any of these processed foods, right? They just don't use those anymore. There's a good reason for it, because food manufacturers, for the most part, they're not making food to make you healthy. They're making food to make money.
Yeah, right.
And
It's profit.
the vegetable oils are 1/6 the cost of butter as of 2014, about 10 years ago. That's, that was
1/6.
1/6. Yeah. So
God.
the amount of, it would cost a food manufacturer 5.6 cents. So less than 6 cents to provide you 720 calories worth of soybean oil. So give you a third of your diet for 5.6 cents. That's what it costs them, right? And then they just, a little bit more, then they can throw in sugar and refined flour, and there you got the basis for a ton of processed food, right? But if they were to substitute butter for the soybean oil, it would cost them 36 cents for the same amount, for the same amount of butter. So that's why they're not going to do that. That's a 6-fold increase in their cost, their overhead. And
Plus the shelf life, I think, is quite a lot longer with seed oils, I believe, right? The shelf life.
I don't think it's really probably all that much different, but it probably is. It probably is longer because it's almost like seed oils. And that's what, that was one of the so-called benefits of trans fats was increases, shelf life, because, nothing wants to grow in there with, with seed oils and trans fats, because, they can't live off of that. And, bugs can't live off of that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so if you were to say, like in measurement, like a cup, teaspoon, something, how much does the average person eat in seed oils, let's say in a day or a year?
Yeah, it's so 80 grams. So it's about 15 grams per tablespoon of oil. So it's 15. It's about five. It's about five or a little more tablespoons of vegetable oil per person per day in the United States.
Per day?
Yeah, per
That's
day.
a lot. 5
Yeah, well, they
tablespoons
don't.
of anything.
You could go have, if you have some, French fry. Well, I mean, just all kinds of processed food. There, you could easily have 3 or 4 tablespoons of vegetable oil in your food, and most people are not even going to recognize it. They're not thinking about it. They'll think about the carbohydrates and the protein, but they're not thinking about the fat that they don't see, because it's not like fat that you'd see on a steak, right? It's not very visible. So it's sort of the invisible fat, but it's there. And that's what in the United States, almost all restaurants are cooking with soybean and canola oil.
Right.
That's
And
their
so
favorite.
list. So like if I'm in the grocery store, what would be the thing to avoid, let's say? Because we know what to buy: real raw butter. We want to get ghee. We would like to get tallow. what would be the thing to avoid? Vegetable oils like the thing that says vegetable oil. Don't do that. What about safflower? What else?
Yeah. So the most dangerous oils would be soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran. And then if you want to, be a little safer, also eliminate sesame and peanut oils. So it's basically like if you say what are the healthy oils? Well, first of all, I would just say to make it simple, this is what we do. I cook everything in butter. Everything. I mean, if you need a bunch of oil, use coconut oil because it's about roughly 95% saturated. Um, I'm sorry, roughly, close to 91 to 95% saturated, right? So it's very, very stable, very, very safe. All right. But, and then olive oil is about 10% omega-6 linoleic acid. Again, I should go back to coconut oil and say it's 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. So olive oil averages about 10%, but you need to be very careful with olive oil because the bulk of it, around 79% in the United States, is either adulterated with these cheap vegetable oils or they're not good quality. They're not fresh. They're oxidized. They're old, so they're dangerous. So I don't use olive oil. If you want to use olive oil, you need to make dead sure that it's fresh, it's safe, and you know that it's authentic because you know that it's coming from a manufacturer that you trust and it's not adulterated. Because most of the adulteration is with cheap oils like soybean and canola.
Yeah, that was fascinating for me to discover. I stay away from olive oil too. I actually think real olive oil is incredible, right? Like I do,
Yeah.
but the problem with it's getting access to real olive oil because to your point, which I don't know if a lot of people know this, but most of the olive oil that we buy is kind of like a third, like a seed oil, basically. That's kind of like making it more voluminous, basically. So and so if it was just really pure olive oil, different story, right? But because it's replaced and packaged and it's a lie, they're lying. It's not pure olive oil. That's causing the problems. And again, to center this back to the why, because I think there's so much, I get irritated when I hear different podcasts or different people talking about all the problems and all the ingredients and all the stupid little things to be. It's like hypochondriac city. Like everybody's freaking out. Everybody's trying, there's too much to be scared of that you end up not paying attention at all. Mm-hmm. And really what I think we're doing with this conversation is really just taking it all and simplifying it down to like, just do this one thing and like a lot will be solved from that. And the one thing is just removing the seed oils from our lives. And how do we do that? It's knowing that list that you just shared and not buying it. It's knowing the other items that you did just share and buy those instead. Coconut oil, great olive oil, if it happens to be real, tallow, ghee, raw butter, those things. But then also acknowledging that so much of our anxiety and our mental health and our struggles with losing weight and appetite and all these autoimmune issues and stuff do come from this one thing. So then also don't eat the processed foods, like the breads, even the pastas are loaded with this. Like what else is it? What else carries it? Like normal foods, would you say carries this type of product?
So,
maybe it's a shorter list to say what doesn't.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think of, what individual ones because anything that has an added fat, it's going to be a vegetable oil. I can almost
added
guarantee
fat.
it. Yeah. So I mean, almost everything that's packaged has some added fat. If you look at it,
like it says added fat.
Of them.
Like it says added fat.
No, well, it would have if you look at the ingredients, they're going to show of anything that's prepared, right, or that's processed. If it has an added fat, meaning they're going to put, when you put together the ingredients for a processed food, you're often going to need to add some kind of fat to it. And so if there's a fat that's added, then it's going to be a vegetable oil. I can almost guarantee it.
I'm going to pull up
Oh,
a label and see if you can just teach us the best way to look at this. Is that cool?
okay. Yeah, sure.
I think this makes sense to do.
Okay.
We're taking this in a direction that we didn't plan on, but okay. Does this show anything that makes sense?
Well, there you go. So look down there: wheat flour, sugar, yeast, wheat gluten, cellulose fiber, calcium sulfate, vegetable oil, in parentheses, soybean. Like I said to you, number one, that's the number one oil in processed food, soybean oil in the United States.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah,
when you see something like this, what your research is basically explaining is that that is potentially the source of people getting cancer, obesity, dementia, having anxiety, depression, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on unnecessary healthcare bills when they don't need to. Something that small, that simple, and a food ingredient could, if we take it out, could prevent that.
absolutely. I'm saying that exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, nutrition science is very complex. I mean, because there's so many variables, but we have to right now, I mean, I'm a public health advocate. That's really what I do. And at the population level, we've got to communicate the big picture, right? And then, if people get the big picture right and they're still having troubles, or they haven't reversed a disease condition, or they're overweight or whatever, then you start digging into the minutia, right? But you got to get the big picture right first. And the big picture is get rid of the processed foods. And that's basically vegetable oils, sugar, and refined flour. That's the main thing. And then from there, then you can start working with, the nitty gritty and get into all the other details. Yeah. It's not, this is, again, I'll just say that everywhere and we have data I just want to say this, Lauren, real quick. In the United States, Australia, United Kingdom, Israel, and Japan, we have data in all 5 countries where sugar has been going down, down, down for decades, while obesity, diabetes, and cancer and macular degeneration all go through the roof. Why? I mean, why? And even at the global level, there's been very little change in sugar consumption for decades. And yet, just like the United States, it's been going down since 1999, sugar consumption. Why is obesity and diabetes and cancer going through the roof, right? It's not the sugar, because sugar's going down.
Can I challenge you on that question?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Because this is the part that I don't understand. How could it be that sugar is going down if processed foods have increased? Because processed foods are loaded with sugar, and they're easily accessible, and they're cheap, and they're everywhere, right? They're just omnipresent. And so while I understand that because processed foods contain like seed oils, like vegetable oils and stuff, but they also contain sugar. So wouldn't their numbers go up too?
No, there's one reason that sugar consumption went down. Only one. It's a reduction in consumption of high fructose corn syrup since 1999. People became afraid of high fructose corn syrup beginning in 1999. And so the soda, that's primarily soda drinks, right? And that consumption has gone down. So because people have been, they've been told for, almost 3 decades, sugar's bad. And rightly so. I'm not disagreeing that, sugar is not necessarily our friend, but in low doses and in good, health, in cane sugar, I think it's fine. I don't think we need to fear sugar like we should the vegetable oils. But there's no question, all the data from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the USDA all shows, every source you look at shows sugar consumption has gone down since 1999, and at least since after 2004, it's been going down.
Yeah. And I think to illustrate sort of like real life context, why sugar may have gone down or fructose went down. it's because of sugar-free drinks probably increasing, like the option to have a sugar-free Coke or a
Yeah,
sugar-free
absolutely.
Dr. Pepper became an option. I have to imagine. And then everything else, right? Sugar-free ice cream. I see like sugar-free Reese's and I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah,
But that's, I think,
yeah,
a trend that might be illustrating real life, like what you're saying and is happened in the data.
yeah, yeah. So so they're just sweetening those things with non-nutritive sweeteners, right? Sucralose and so forth. But yeah, and I certainly wouldn't recommend those either. That's not going to help people at all to go that direction.
Okay. Yeah. So don't go. So basically from all this research you've done, you spent how long again? 10, 12 years doing
I've been
this?
working on this really since 2011, but I've been full-time research since February of 2015. So
So you've been doing
almost
this
10
for
years now.
full-time research. You've been doing this for 10 years.
Yeah,
So you've dedicated your life to figuring
absolutely.
out.
I left practice in February of 2015 to pursue this full time, and I've been
And
doing it ever since.
and and do you ever wonder if you have a bias to want to believe this, or how do you check that?
No, I mean, I don't get paid to do any of this work. I don't. We don't have any industry sponsors, and we won't allow it. So I work for nonprofits. I don't earn any income. I'm pointing this out because why I wouldn't have any biases. Why I don't care what the answers are. I don't care if it's sugar. I don't care if it's vegetable oils. I don't care if it's saturated fat. I don't care what the answers are. I just want to know the answers. And when I think I've, figured it out and I feel really, really confident, then I'll go public with it. I've written, from papers to books. And, but I work really hard at this for years before I don't go to the public until I'm really confident that what I'm going to say, I don't have to later retract. So there's been almost nothing that I would retract over my career in nutrition. I've been very confident. The only thing I would change is I feel much more confident that honey is a very, very good and safe food. That I wouldn't have in my first book on macular degeneration that I published back in 2016. I really kind of felt like honey was more like sugar. It's just nutrient deficient, and I don't feel like that at all anymore. But other than that, Lauren, I'm just saying that I'm I'm very confident with enormous amount of data. We've got even by 2017, we had data on this consumption in 25 nations. 25 nations, and we've got data in like 35 nations now. And this data, I'm telling you, like I showed you with the United States today, if that data shows the same thing, in country after country after country, and even in the whole world, what should that tell us? I mean, you have to respect the data because correlation is extraordinarily important to establishing causal inference. It's the most important thing there is. And when you don't have correlation, it's very, very, very unlikely that you're going to prove causation.